As the world marks Workers' Day, one would argue that the existing unions are too compromised by the national and nationalist politics to offer any real answers to the working class and poor majority in South Africa. However, some see new forms of worker unions as evidence that unions are starting to adapt to the new challenges that workers are facing. Workers are confronted by dramatic changes in the world of work through automation and the fast coming forth industrial revolution and a growing representational gap. Is the role of organized labor in South Africa still relevant in this day and age? To answer this and more, we're joined by SAFTU's General Secretary Zolenzi Mavavi, as well as COSATU's First Deputy President Mike Shingange. And of course, we would have had a former unionist, Jay Naidoo, who's just apologized, who says he cannot join us for this conversation. But we have labor analyst Terry Bell, who is with us for this conversation. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. I know it's been a busy day as you were attending different events marking Workers' Day. But I'd like to begin with you, Mike, if I may. Does Workers' Day still have a meaning for workers?
Well, Workers' Day will, good evening to you and your viewers. Workers' Day will always have a meaning because it is a day that, particularly for it to be recognized as a paid holiday, it's a day that is a result of a struggle of workers, some of whom have lost their lives, some of whom have lost their job. So it is important for workers to always commemorate this day in remembrance of those who became before them, but also the struggles that were waged by their forebears, but also taking into account the challenges facing workers today and recommit to continuously, to relentlessly fight for the emancipation of the workers. So it needs to have a meaning. It doesn't mean that every time when there's Workers' Day, it will always be a celebratory mood. It's like we're jubilant because things are well and good. It is actually just to make us to pause and reflect and then reconscientize workers about the need for workers to always come together and unite, because other than that, we're facing serious challenges. So it may be as well that today, last year, and maybe a few years ago, there was very little to celebrate. But as for the significance of the day itself, we should never forget that.
And Terry, when one looks at the workers today and some of the issues that they are facing, others then argue that some unions appear to be out of touch with some of what their members are going through. Would you agree with this assertion?
I would certainly agree with that, and I think the unions have actually missed out on an awful lot of ways they should have been reacting. But in terms of your first question, I mean, I'd like to quote something that was actually written by Rosa Luxemburg, a great stalwart, who said that as long as the struggle of the workers against the ruling class continues, as long as all demands, and that's for decent work, for decent housing, for enough food for everyone, for an egalitarian and truly democratic society. Until these demands are met, May Day will be the yearly expression of these demands. And when better days dawn, she said, when the working class of the world has won its deliverance, then too humanity will probably celebrate May Day in honor of the bitter struggles and the many sufferings of the past. Unfortunately, I think we're in the process still of the bitter struggles and many, many sufferings right now, because we have a great deal more unemployment globally, not just in South Africa.
And Mr. Vavi, when one then looks at, the situation, particularly what Terry is describing, unemployment, COVID-19 now, really compounding issues, and looking at the fact that even workers themselves are still trying to fight for that particular wage agreement, is May Day just fast becoming a song that is sung by unions, or are they still relevant in this fight?
I think there could have been no better picking up of a quote by Terry than the quote of Rosa Luxemburg on this issue of the continuous struggle, the contradictions in society, the contradiction between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, the marginalized and those who are occupying positions of power in the economy that are abusing that power to exploit that majority. As long as that condition still arises, the cause for a continuous struggle against today's conditions and the need to look back in our history to celebrate the martyrs of the working class, their pain, their tribulations, their suffering, their tears, and it is necessary. So today, on the 160th year anniversary of May Day, we're once again in the streets under these conditions that are totally foreign to us. We normally gather in our thousands today. Today we are limited to 250 people. So we had 250 rallies in South all over the country to mark May Day and to celebrate the sterling contributions of the Chicago heroes and heroines, but to look at our own specific history, the victories that we have scored, the role that we organized workers played as a leading detachment of the working class towards the breakthrough of 1994. But of course, the point that you're raising, Ngongwe, is this: men today, things are absolutely different. We lost 1.5 million jobs last year alone. And we must not carry the propaganda forward of the ruling elites in South Africa who think that the crisis in South Africa arrived with coronavirus. Nonsense. We were in a deep crisis of unemployment, poverty, inequalities, corruption, dysfunctional schools, dysfunctional public hospitals, a dysfunctional criminal justice system before March of 2020. But point given, those crises have gone even worse with the coronavirus pandemic in South Africa and all over the world.
And Terry, there's a raging debate in some sectors where, they say that the labor movement may either be dead or it is being reborn. Which one are you leaning towards?
I'm hoping it will become reborn, because I mean the labor movement needs now to really look at itself and realize the mistakes that have been made in the past. I found it ironic today. There was a virtual, and Mike perhaps can come in on this, there was a virtual May Day meeting in COSATU House where you had the President, Ramaphosa, speaking, and he talked about how the ANC government respects collective bargaining. This is a government that is now in court and resisting the fact that they're refusing to pay the third-year tranche of an agreement that they pushed through to the public sector workers and paid for 2 years, and then suddenly said, Asina Mali, no money left. I mean, this I find highly ironic. And I think COSATU again needs to look again at their relationship with the ANC and the government. We've had enough of this conveyor belt of people moving across from, say, for example, Senzeni Zokwana, who's the president of NUM, just becomes automatically the Minister of Agriculture. You have Judith Macy, who was there today at COSATU House, the General Secretary of SADTU, the Teachers Union, who then becomes the Labour Minister. You know, these are things we need to look at from the trade union point of view and say, have we not become far too bureaucratic? Have we not become, in some senses, I'm not only attacking COSATU here at all. I think there are other sections as well of the union movement who have investment companies, etc., who have never really looked at that. They're still dealing with fights of the 20th or the mid part of the 20th century when we've moved into a completely new era now. And the unions have never managed to adjust. And I suspect that had we had rallies now, if we hadn't have had COVID, we had a rally, it would have been a bit embarrassing because it would not have been a very large turnout.
And Mike, what do you say to that? Have the lines been blurred? Is your closeness to the governing party compromising your fight?
Well, in regard to the current struggles, we don't think so. Perhaps we must first acknowledge that indeed the gains of democracy, which the workers have relentlessly fought for and won, are being rolled back. And sadly, it is indeed the fact that it's been rolled back by a government that is supposed to understand in the first place, or supposed to be champions of those rights and those gains. But to say that it is as if it is a fault of COSATU for that to happen, it will be far from the truth. Because when government, for instance, decided not to implement the resolutions 1 of 2018, it did not do so only to COSATU unions. It did to every federation's member and every trade union. That is why we think for us, the time for that debate amongst ourselves as workers should be of the past. We need to focus in the unity and to fight for what's rightful for our workers. I must say that The debate in COSATU now about the relationship in the allies, it is raging. The appropriate structures at appropriate time will make that determination and make that call. But for now, it is very important for us to focus on what is important. It's a fact that today, as we celebrate Workers' Day, one of the biggest threats to the workers is actually the threat to reverse the rights of workers for collective bargaining, the right to strike, the weakening of the CCMA by cutting the budget to a point where at a time when the employers are using the pandemic to retrench workers in mass and blaming pandemic coronavirus, but those workers can't find a recourse because the CCMA is incapacitated by the action of the government. It's a fact that the private sector employers, the minings, the retail sectors, they are all walking away from side agreements, and they are citing the government as an example, and they feel that if the government that is responsible for developing and protecting and championing this policy can walk away from such, indeed, there's nothing they can do. In fact, we have said even today when the president addressed our meeting, because he would have addressed the rally anyway, if it was even a rally, although I think maybe it would have been different with workers there. Perhaps we would have had a difficult time. But we have said to them that, in fact, workers are waiting to the Constitutional Court ruling, so was to find out once and for all whether we have wasted 27 years thinking that we have got the right to collective bargaining in this country, while the government all along thought that collective bargaining is unconstitutional. That is why they are putting it before the Constitutional Court judges to decide. In fact, they are hoping that the judges must rule in their favor that actual collective bargaining is unconstitutional and unlawful.
But Mike, does it really, I mean, I'm listening to what you're saying there to say two things that are quite critical. You're saying that this debate of your closeness to the ruling party must not be had, but it should be had right now, particularly because concerns continue to mount around your closeness to the governing party, because everything you're complaining about to say that has been meted out against your members who are the workers. Who is at the back of that? Who is at the back of cutting some of these budgets you're talking about to the CCMA? And secondly, then you say that had it been a rally with the workers, the president may have had a difficult time. So he's enjoying a cozy time with you as a leadership. So it means you're not representing your members well.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying the debate shouldn't be healthy. We shouldn't be taking place. I'm saying the debate of the three of us here shouldn't be about the relationship of COSATU and the ANC or the government. Because I do not think that had it been a different government that one of the ANC will be speaking a different language in as far as the onslaught on workers is concerned. For us, it doesn't matter which governing party is. The reality is that this onslaught on workers is not only a South African phenomenon. We have seen it. If you followed us as COSATU, we have gone to Swaziland, we have gone to Zimbabwe, we have gone to solidarity with Greece, because it has been coming. The neoliberalism across the world has been coming. It is unfortunate that indeed our government is captured by that, is embracing that. But we don't think that it is only because it is a government of the ANC. And this is not to defend the ANC. The debate is taking place inside COSATU. It always takes place. It has never been given that it is automatic that the COSATU will always be closer and working with the ANC. It's always a product of debates in congresses of various unions and in Congress of the Federation itself. All I'm saying is that when we're dealing with the challenges that have faced the workers today, in particular on the International Workers' Day, it will be a misnomer to only focus on one federation out of the many federations that we have in the country. So it's a relationship with a ruling party as a source of the problem of the workers, the issues that are facing workers today. There are many work unions that are not in COSATU. They have not won the things that COSATU have not won. They have not won some of the things that COSATU have won. So it's misplaced to just focus on that only. Let's focus on what is it that the working class across sectarians, across the federation can do to collectively fight irrespective of the federation they belong to.
I tell you what, I'm looking at Terry there. He's having a difficult time comprehending some of what you're saying. But I'd like to bring you in there, Mr. Va, because I can see you're also shaking your head.
Absolutely. Look, there's some truth in what Comrade Mike is saying, that the gains of workers are being reversed by a government that have adopted a neoliberal program and that have implemented austerity measures. The fact that this government is pulling out of an agreed to contract with the employees is because the austerity program dictated to it by the rating agencies or by the Washington and New York ruling elites says to government, you have to assault your workers and you have to undermine the collective bargaining that are the structures that workers won way back through the Behind Commission. In 1979, before the ANC could come back to the country, workers fought and won those victories. That is now currently being reversed. What is deeply insulting to workers is for a president who's leading that charge to sit next to the leadership of the Federation, COSATU, and proclaim his love and his determination to protect the sanity of collective bargaining structure when he have led the assault on collective bargaining that is now being followed by employers in the private sector, including the security that employs the lowest paid workers in the rest of the service sector. That's absolutely deeply insulting. The second point, Comrade Mike, we have to disagree on this one. You're making as if now COSATU have adopted that tenor. There is no alternative to neoliberalism. No, comrade. There is alternatives to neoliberalism as we speak. In fact, as we speak, the South African government have become even more conservative than Joe Biden. Joe Biden, the American president, the very belly of the system of capitalism, have put in trillion rands in the form of the relief measures to protect the poor. Here in South Africa, we are stopping 350 rands a month. That was meant to give a relief to the poor. In America, workers are earning a once of 34,000 rands through a relief measure. Here in South Africa, workers are being told that we are only starting a debate about the basic income grant that has been on the table since 2002. And there are alternatives to the ANC. It's just that the leadership of the Federation, COSATU, is refusing to fight alongside other workers and to fight for a new workers' government that is not going to embrace neoliberalism and austerity, that is going to take us into a true developmental path, a new economy and restructured economy that will be overhauled to be based on meeting the most basic needs of workers, in particular for employment.
Pardon me for coming in there. I'd like us to go for a quick ad break. When we come back, I see Mike is itching to respond, and also Terry, has something to say. But let's continue now our conversation with SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi, COSATU's first Deputy President Mike Shingange, as well as Labour analyst Terry Bell. Mr. Bell, you wanted to come in there before we went for the ad break.
Yes, indeed, because you see, I'm not opposed to COSATU or any other federation. I'm pro-trade unions. But I remember, you see, that it was the United Trade Union movement led by COSATU back in the 1990s, after 1994, that actually brought about the big changes in labor laws, etc., that we've now won. It was also the United Trade Union movement, and that was right across all federations, that put forward in 1996 a very sensible, mildly reformist, I would call it by my standards, but a very sensible, not neoliberal program called the Social Equity and Job Creation Project, which was simply overturned by the ANC government with their Growth, Employment and Redistribution GEAR program. And since then, we've had one sect of neoliberal programs after the other following on. That is my criticism, that the point is COSATU won those concessions then, and when they were turned around and slapped in the face by the government, they then backed off slowly, and you ended up with unions then becoming more bureaucratic, unions setting up investment companies, etc., becoming part and parcel of the very system that they supposedly opposed. So what I'm trying to say here is they need to look back at that history and say, look, could we, if we had have stepped outside of that earlier, we would have won more concessions, and we certainly wouldn't have lost the amount of ground we've lost now. And let's face it, the unions are a lot weaker now, not just because of fragmentation, certainly not because of the pandemic. That is an excuse they shouldn't use. We have lost an awful lot of space here in South Africa. Globally, yes, it's a problem. But we could lead the way here by having an alternative proposals put forward. And the unions have done so in the past. They can do so again.
Ntate Shingang, when then you hear what Mr. Pal is saying, let's talk then about unity. Could this be something that you see maybe various unions, including yourselves, trying to forge ahead with in order to bring about the big changes that he's talking about?
In fact, that's the point I was making earlier on, because that was the message of our May Day today through our president. We have started this project of uniting the workers across the federations to do exactly what Mr. Bell is saying, what was done in the 90s and then in 1996. We did so leading as COSATU, all the other federations, the other workers in this country, but we still were in the alliance with the ANC. And like it correctly says, we were able to win some of those, even when they were being rolled back. We challenged them collectively. All I'm saying, because I think it's a misrepresentation of facts when Mr. Vavi says that I said that there's no alternative to neoliberalism. No, we are actually calling for the workers to unite and indeed find an alternative. But an alternative that we're talking about is it's indeed a socialist-oriented kind of alternative. But it's not to say it will not help anybody, particularly unions that are not within COSATU, to look at COSATU as if they are the stumbling block or is the enemy of the workers. It will not achieve anything if we are instead of challenging and focusing on what we think is the problem for workers. Our cry and our criticism always will be COSATU. We will not go anywhere, because in any case, if it was possible for us to go anywhere without a united force, some unions will have achieved that without COSATU. What is COSATU in the first place? All we are saying is that we are calling for a workers' unity. We must challenge this neoliberalism. We must fight for the workers' right. We must forget about which union and which color of the t-shirts we wear. It is important for us to return back. It's indeed a time for the rebuild of the unions. Mr. Pell correctly speaks about the united trade union movement in the past. What is not mentioning as challenges of the unions now is a fragmentation and a multiple federations of the unions that we have today. We are collectively 205 unions in this country. Collectively, we are only organizing 27% of South African workforce. Out of the 40 million workers, we're only organizing 4 million, all of us collectively. That is a challenge we have to look into, and that's why the fragmentation of the trade union in this country makes it difficult for the workers' voice to be united, because this debate we're having tonight about COSATU there and SAFTA there and perhaps Medusa there is going to leave the employer on a honeymoon unchallenged by anybody, because workers are looking at each other as enemies.
It sounds like he's got a point there, Mr. Vavi, because certainly when you're pulling in different directions, then the fight becomes against one another versus the fight being about what you're trying to achieve.
Let me just say three things. The COSATU that Terry Bell is speaking about that led the struggle for the transformation of South African labor market forces began to eat itself up. And that's why we had Marikana. That's why we had workers in Titorans taking up their own battles. That's why those that were calling for a break with the tripartite alliance politics were dismissed. And that's why those that were taking up the issue of corruption of their leadership in SADAW, in SAMU, and other unions were kicked out, brutalized by the bodyguards. That's the first point. So the day COSATU concluded the discussion about getting out of that alliance, we will find it so easy to realize the dream of one country, one federation. The second point I want to make is this, that it is, and I'm sorry to say this, comrades, Mike, it is betrayal of workers. It is pulling wool all over their eyes. When you campaign for a party you know stand for the reversal of the gains of workers, as you are going to be doing so during the local government elections. When you know that this government is leading the assault on collective bargaining, when it is imposing a wage freeze for 4 years and resolving the crisis of capitalism at the back of workers, when it is leading a total collapse of social security system and leaving workers to their own devices when they are facing a pandemic, when it will not introduce a national health insurance, when it will not introduce a basic income grant, but instead remove even protections to the vulnerable children. That's betrayal of the workers when you rally these very same victims of neoliberalism and austerity to vote for their political butchers. Is betrayal of the working class. And I want the leadership to take this thing in the true spirit of somebody who was born into COSATU and into the ANC, but who doesn't and who's not prepared to be a victim of love and loyalty, even if that love and loyalty is at the expense of workers. So our call to COSATU is get out of that bed, comrades. Let's join forces. And in fact, we are not aware, that's the third point, we are not aware of the unity process started by COSATU. We want that desperately. I can show you letters where we write and say, comrades, we can even suspend the debate about the alliance because the point now is to fight austerity and to make sure that workers have wages and that we defend workers at SAA, at ESCOM, at TINEL, and Petro SA together as a united front. That's what we are calling for in this May Day, not falsehoods about this unity. We love workers, but we want workers to be enslaved and to be chained into neoliberalism forever. So we're calling for honesty, a little bit of more honesty in this discussion as we are celebrating the 160th anniversary of the May Day. This is the day of heroes, of heroines, of their blood, of their pain, of their suffering, of their tribulations. This is the day we should be looking back and saying, we've committed mistakes. Those mistakes are haunting us. The workers are voting on their foot and they have no trust on the trade union movement as a whole because they can see this whole dance that is happening today. You pretend to be fighting the government. Tomorrow we are smiling with it dancing in the floor. It's a contradiction. And so our appeal from SAFTU is we want unity. We're desperate for unity with COSATU, but we want an independent COSATU that can unite with all of other workers to launch a new struggle for the total economic emancipation of the working class as a whole. So that will inspire this generation and many generations to come if we were to do so.
So what you're saying is that this process of unity that COSATU is talking about, which is very much needed in this particular sector, will hit a snag on your side should COSATU approach you as SAFTU to try and unite against this one common goal?
We will not put conditions because we've learned from our experience that if you put preconditions in negotiations, you're going to go nowhere because the other side will also put preconditions. We want to enter into a discussion with open minds, but I think COSATU knows that it will undermine the process of unity discussions if it was to bring into the table Blake Zimande on the behind the curtains and the multi-billionaires Cyril Ramaphosa behind the curtains. Because the other people will say, who's behind that curtain? And what is your relationship between them? And where does workers feature in this relationship we're having with this?
And I'll come to you in just a moment, Mr. Bell, as we round up this conversation. We're out of time. And Ndata Shingange, do you want to respond quickly to that? You know, this peace process that you say you are starting appears to be, you know, not so well received at the moment.
Of course, because much as the Comrade Vavi says is not putting conditions, it's actually putting conditions. Because one thing that we must agree, me and him, is that there is a political and ideological differences here. He's talking about a political party or some workers' government. Surely that's a political debate that must take place. So if that's going to be a precondition for us, the worker unit indeed is going to hit us neck, because he must also respect the political and ideological orientation of other workers in this country. It cannot be that the only way we can unite is if we agree politically. Our view was that let's leave that. Let's leave the alliances we have. Let's leave the political parties we choose. Let's unite around that which is attacking the workers, which doesn't discriminate which political party you belong to. That's number one. But again, Comrade Vavi will know, having been in COSATU, that the decision such as he's talking about of campaigning for any political party has never only been taken by the leadership. You will have known, you will have heard that some unions and some leaders said something else. A series of meetings has to be convened where leaders will come with mandate from their organizations to represent them in the COSATU, and therefore a particular decision will be taken. We can't start to undermine that process, that process that Comrade Vavi knows very well, the mandate-driven process, because simply we are frustrated. We need to come to a day when workers are going to say, indeed, this is where we're going. We're getting out or we're getting in. For now, we're carrying the mandate. So if the Unity Project, Comrade Vavi, is going to wait for the day the COSATU is going to leave the tripartite alliance, then sadly and unfortunately, we're in for a very long wait.
And Mr. Bell, as a parting shot, how do you see this?
Anywhere near being concluded by now.
Mr. Bell, as a parting shot, how do you see this, you know, unity process working out in the future?
Very difficultly, but unity is just the very beginning. The point is they should not be thinking merely of protecting jobs and wages, etc. We need to go back, and that's why I mentioned 1996, when the trade union movement united looked towards ahead and actually put forward proposals for the future and how we should be acting and how we should be organizing democratically. Then we can truly say, Phambili basebenzi, and mean it.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you for your time tonight. That was SAFTU's General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi, COSATU's first Deputy President Mike Shingange, as well as Labour Analyst Terry Bell.